All right. Before I ended the last recording, I was going to try to put a switch statement in here, but ended up pushing a Control Q key, or Command Q, which quit my virtual machine. I screwed up my recording. So here we go. I did type the switch statement. Here's what it looks like. I'm asking what is the value of my combo box now. Combo boxes have values because you only pick one from that list. Right? So combo boxes have values. And here's my combo box on this side. And notice that each one of my combo box entries has an abbreviated value. So that's what I have to check for here. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll wait. You'll probably hit it.
All right. Each one of my statements, I started with a message because I can't document write line more than once. As soon as I document write line, my form inputs go away. Right, so I created a message, concatenated the right course name to the message, and then like a dummy, I forgot to display it. But I finally remembered after running it. And there is a break after every one of those commands. If you leave the break out, I'll pick program, I have to remember to do web data management. Okay. If you leave the break out accidentally, it will fall through and do both. Again, in C#, it won't let you do it. Occasionally, there's value in falling through, but it's pretty rare, and there's other ways around it. So you got to remember to put the breaks in here in JavaScript. If you don't put them in, they don't happen. And let me show you one other thing. I showed you the breakpoints in Firefox. I'm going to show you one of the reasons why doing this kind of a combined thing is not a great idea. I'm going to put a breakpoint on that line. Sure, it's kind of hard to see up there, but here's my breakpoint. Let's say I want to look inside and see what the value is. It's very difficult to do. If I want to touch this and look inside, notice I can see CMB course, but I can't see inside it, though I think if I highlight the whole thing, it tells me. So a better idea would really be to put this CMB course.value into a variable. That way, if you want to see what's inside, all you have to do is hit the variable, and it'll tell you what's inside. But you can still, if you want bigger chunks, highlight and touch them and see what's inside. And then you can watch it process. So I can step over, and it's looking for web programming, and it found it, and it's updated the message. It skipped the rest, so it must have found it. So when you're writing JavaScript, this is nice and neat and short, but when you're debugging, it can be a little bit more of a headache if you don't remember to highlight the whole thing to see what's inside. Another thing I wanted to show you is how we can combine these. Now this says if it's web programming or web data or logic, it's an IT course. Otherwise, it's Microsoft Office. I can change that to something else. But any one of these should match an IT course. And there used to be a reset button here. Where'd it go? Guess I'll have to do it the hard way. And I want to get rid of, didn't have a breakpoint on there. Yep, let's get rid of the breakpoint before I start over. F5. Web programming's at the top of the list. If I hit submit, I get an IT course. Move my submit button up. It reports the same thing. So if you need multiple values that all process the same way, you just stack them on top of each other with no breaks.
So then you're saying something that with radio buttons you can't do it with a switch statement?
According to my notes, we can't. So she's curious, let's find out. Let's follow my own advice here and create a variable called value that is equal to dollar, and then the radio buttons are what? Fave color, I think. Is that the name? Fave color dot value. Okay, so in here, then I can just look at the value variable and say, what do we have coming at me for radio buttons here? Nope, it's not fave color, that's the other one. You guys lied to me. The name is program. Okay, and I'm going to have coming at me for values either prog or net or undecided.
So you use the ID instead of the name?
Oops, thank you, yes. And the ID for all, they all have the same name, but they have different IDs. Ooh. So then what could I do? Could I go down into my case statement and say that that value of the CMB, wait a second here, courses, programs. Okay, you're right, we use the ID. But how do I go at it? Which one of those IDs should I be referring to?
None.
Can't.
You should use the name.
I can't. JavaScript doesn't recognize the name. That's why I can't do it, okay? Because they don't all have one common name. And what I don't think I can do, and I think I tried this, but let me try it here just to prove it, is if I put the word true in here, could I have a case that says A double equals A? Because that's what I would have to do. Break here is optional, but most programmers will put it in, so if you decide to move the default up, you can. And then the message here equals doesn't matter, I'm just putting something in there. So if A equals A, that should be true, right? If A equals A, I should get a message of Volker. Otherwise, I'll get something else. I'm also very concerned that I might get an error, so help me keep an eye on that. The default radio buttons selected. Oh, we got all kinds of radio buttons. I got an error. And it sent it, but I got an error. And it sent it, which means that my function didn't process. My JavaScript stopped, and it sent me to this page instead. So there was an error when I hit these lines. So I could put a breakpoint in there and prove it, but this basically says this is not legal. Or that one's not legal. I'm guessing this one might be okay, but that's not.
So then will you show us how to?
Yeah, so how do we know which radio button it was?
If else,
Pardon me?
if else.
If else and else ifs, okay? If this one is checked or that one is checked or that one is checked. Right, and we don't look at the value because there is no fave color. So actually this is what's causing the error. Let me get that out of there because there is no fave color. Let's see if I fixed the problem with that. Just occurred to me. F5, programming is still selected and ooh, now we get fault. But we did get fault, which means A double equals A didn't work. And it should, right? That should be true, which matches this. We should get Volker, but there's no break in there. Uh-oh. Maybe he's a liar after all. One more time. refresh, go. Uh-oh. So, let's try again. Still want to know, is the radio button selected? We still have to go through. Maybe we can use a case statement. Maybe my syntax logic wasn't quite right when I wrote those notes. So what do I want to know? I want to know if RDO, what's the name of it? I should have left my other window open. No, view. Oh, come on. Clone to the other view. Okay. So down here, looking at my radio buttons there. If RDO programmer dot, RDO programmer is the name of the radio button. And then I have to put a $sign on it. Ooh, it's getting ugly, but it doesn't mean it doesn't work. Dot, checked. Selected is for list boxes, right? Radio buttons and check boxes are checked. So this is a Boolean property, I think. Sounds like it should be Boolean, right?
Yes or no, true.
So if that's true, then we should get Voker. Otherwise, we should get fault. So let's see what happens. Programmer is selected, and that's the one I'm asking, is it selected? Refresh the page just in case. Go. Ooh, I got Voker. Cool. So now we go back and pick a different one. See if it still get Voker. So it does work. I must have written something wrong, or this is a new version of JavaScript. Beta 6.2 of JavaScript. No, that's not the case. So we could just work our way down here now, and for each one of the radio buttons, put something in. And we got RDO networker and RDO undeclared. Okay, here's the big test. I'll have to change my notes again. And by the way, I put this in the default. I don't normally do that. If there's only 3 options, why would you put default there to say everything else? There's only 3. There is one other option though, and that's none of them are selected. But I have a default radio button selected. There's no way to turn them off. Even if I refresh the page, because every time I refresh the page, it goes back and chooses Programmer Analyst. So once the radio buttons are on, there's no way to turn them off. So in this case, I wouldn't normally write the default case. Let's just test it to make sure it still works, and it does. So that part of my note is lying. What's more important is this is how you check to see if a radio button is checked, and this is also then a technique you now have in this sample for finding out which radio button was it. Could use something similar to find out if any radio button was selected. But it's usually much easier just to go through and ask if. Now we can't get to the name, can we? How do you know if you have, let's say you have 15 radio buttons, bad idea. Well, let's say you have 15 radio buttons and you want to know if the user picked one because you didn't pick a default value for them. Can you use required on radio buttons? Did any of you try that?
Yes,
And? Did it force you to pick a radio button?
yes,
It did.
yes.
Let's prove it. Not that I don't believe you. You might just try to be pushing me along in this recording, so I'm going to double check here.
No,
No, I understand.
it works.
It works, good. So let's give that a shot. So here's the checked. And what happens if we change it to required? Save.
No,
Why is
it'll
that?
only require one.
Hmm?
It'll only require one.
Doesn't matter which one you put the required on.
Yep.
Okay, I think that's what I was suspicious of. Okay, so now I've reset and notice none of these are picked. If I come down here and submit,
Says,
nice, you can't leave without picking one of these.
correct.
Of course, that's HTML5. What happens when we view that in IE8? Then off it goes merrily on its way. And submits what for the name here? Nothing, an empty string.
Then you need your JavaScript.
Then you can use the JavaScript. But how would I know which one, if it weren't for the required here, how would I know that none of them are selected? To look to each one of them and see if it's checked. If it is, then we're good. If any one of them is checked, we can actually use a loop to walk through this. And I think I have that sample code available for you a little bit later. I'll give it to you. But the point is, if you don't have the required feature available to you and you want to make sure that one of the radio buttons is checked, you have to look at each one of them in turn to see if there's one that's checked.
Can you make an invisible radio button automatically checked? That way you only can check that.
The only risk in that is that there's a value that's sent back. And you'd still have to do an if statement somewhere along the way saying if my invisible one is still checked,
That way you only have to check one though.
only have to check one. Another option, Harold, maybe you got it.
Couldn't you JavaScript a case statement and then do the default as nothing's checked? And then
Good.
check there?
That's another good way to do it, right? We can use this, the JavaScript that I just wrote, where every single radio button is up above and it, go away. Every single radio button is up above, checked, colon, nothing, 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 and the last one is a break. And the default is something's wrong. Right? You could set a flag. You could also set a flag, and then anytime any radio button is checked, and we'll see how to do that, it's event handler. Anytime any radio button is checked, you set the flag off. Then you could check that variable later. Right? So there's a number of ways to do it. The easiest way I found is to use a loop. There is a loop to say find all of the objects whose name is program. Because you can find objects by name. And you can find a list of objects by name, and then you go through the list and see if any one of them is checked in a loop. And it's 2-3 lines of code instead of, if I had 15 radio buttons, 15 cases that I'd have to type. Plus, if I add more cases, I have to modify my code. If I use the loop, I don't have to modify my code. So I will share the loop with you a little later. Actually, it might be one of my utilities. Get random, get selected radio button. Let's take a look. Get selected radio button. Get elements by name. That creates an array. Because there could be lots of elements with that name. And if we send in the radio button name, we're basically saying program here. And then we walk through that array. Here's the length of the array. If button, radio button sub I is checked, then we return which one it was. And if we get to the end, then the function doesn't return anything. We get a null, and we can check for that and say none of them are checked. That's another handy-dandy little routine that I found that goes through and finds out which radio button is checked. And if the result is nothing,
By the
then
group
you yell.
name.
Pardon me?
By the group name.
By the group name. Well, what do I mean by the group name? Not the field. You're thinking of the group box. That's not the case. I can tell by the way you moved your hands. Right? Each one of these radio buttons has the same name. Remember? That's the rule for radio buttons. They all have to have the same name to be considered part of the same group. The fact that they're in the same field set doesn't mean anything here. It's their name.
You could use the loop to find the one that is checked too, couldn't you?
That's what that loop does.
Yeah, instead of the case statement though.
Yes, that's what this loop over here though does, is it goes through and finds out which one is checked and sends it back. Right, and if it doesn't find any, it has a return, it still returns, but it returns nothing. And you can put that in an if statement.
You'd use the case statement if you wanted to do something different in code depending on which one was checked.
Right, if you want to do something to your code, that's different. But if you just want to find out if one of them is checked or which one is checked, that little get selected radio button routine will do it. And it's in my library, so all you have to do is include it to use it. Okay, any other questions about switch statements? Got a little carried away with switches there. Thanks to Brittany's question. I'll fix my notes.
Thanks, Brittany.
And just mangled notepad.
Oh,
Man, there must be something in the air. Really? You done yet? Nope. Pause. So a couple of tricks there. This is false. All right, put it in the recording. This is false. It does work. The sample code that I just wrote shows you how to do it. Do a comparison and then check to see if the radio button dot checked property is true. If it is true, this seems to work. But for radio buttons, it's dot checked. That's another thing that's important. How do I know if a radio button is checked? And what else would you want to know? In JavaScript, you check the dot checked property. That's Boolean, true, false. It either is or it isn't, and process as appropriate. If we want to check a course number, that came out of a combo box. A combo box single select gets a single value. And a little later here, we're going to take a look at a list box that is multi-select. And then how do I know which ones they picked? Because it's which ones did they pick? And we modify the results a little bit based on that. So I think that's coming up here in a minute. After here we go. Here's an inline if. And I want to determine how many multi-select items, see below, are selected. How many? So how do I tell if it's a multi-select item? Note accessing a list array elements for in doesn't seem to work. Okay, here's another one I should probably check. Use a for loop to determine the number of topics selected. We take a look at the options in my list box. Because the name, or the, what is that? That's the value that's reset. Remember, I'm just going to demonstrate this here real quick. Turn all my JavaScript off for a second. Return true says submit, because this is in on submit. Default says cancel it. Don't let it go. So here I'm overriding it. As soon as I return true, I never get down to the return false. So this just says do it and move on anyways, because I want to see when I make a multi-selection from here, and I already have two selected, so let's do one more. Too late? Yep, too late. So I can't just do return true unless I put it up higher. I also want to get rid of that required radio button.
It's on the way it should be.
Okay, now here I have 1, 2, 3 items, and that's in the, I don't know if that's the value property. This is some, I hate it when I get bright ideas in class. Let's see if we can find out in our JavaScript here how many items are selected in the value property. I did turn myself into JavaScript here, so that's why these are working. That's Control Q. But notice it kind of messes up my syntax highlighting down here. It's a little different than what we're used to. Still readable. Okay, so those are commented out. This needs to be commented. You might as well be commented out again as well. And now what I want to do is set up a message box. And I want to find out from my list box what are my favorite topics. And the name equals list topics, but with a square bracket. But what if I check the value? Can I check the value of a list box? My guess is no. So the name of this is list topics.
Dollar list topics.
Hmm?
Dollar list topics.
Yeah. I expect a syntax there.
But you gotta count. Don't you gotta count?
No, there's, or I actually, what was in my notes? Was it length? Yeah, there's a length here. So maybe it's not count. Let's just try that. Did I get my syntax error? Not yet, but I probably have to submit. No, it's stuck. Not getting any bugs.
Is there a field up top that needs to be filled in?
No, because usually it would yell at me.
Do you have a right line?
Did I save it? Oh, I built my, thank you. Built my message but never displayed it. But I didn't get an error, so that's interesting. Never heard of it. Let's try length.
Don't we gotta count the number of items in the array?
Well, that's kind of what I'm asking. Okay. But first I want to see if the value is available to me, because in a text box I have a value property, right? I want to see if it's available to me, and if it is, how many items does it have? Because it could be a multi-select. Let's just first start with that, see if I can get anything out of it.
Yeah, the length just gives you how many characters are in the selected.
But what if there's multiple? Probably just gives you the first one, right? Count is HTML based, so the value is the first one that I selected.
We gotta use a for loop to step through them, don't we? And get their names.
Yep. I'm just checking to see if there's a shortcut. If I can just get the values to be an array, but I don't think it is. I'm guessing that values now is going to be forms. Yep. And if I do length, it'll tell me the length of that in characters.
What if you ask for values as an array?
How? How do I display just an array? You can't. Not in JavaScript. You can't just say, give me the array, and then it does the magic that Swift does in the playground and gives you all the elements and displays them nicely. Sorry, ain't gonna happen. So we're going back to what Tim says. We're gonna have to process it as an array. My list courses has options. That's already an array that has a length. So let's go check that out. So down here, count is list topics dot options dot length. Five. So now I know how many elements are in the array. All right.
If you're not empty, give me the name.
It's not empty. It's whether it's selected or not. And that's what my notes are telling me over on the side here is I can ask for this individual element, options sub I, because that's an array, has to be, otherwise it doesn't have a length. Tell me whether or not it's selected.
Where'd you want them?
Where did I put that? Right inside my message?
Options, not like that.
Don't forget the var in your for loop. For I equals 0, as long as I is less than the LST topics dot options dot length.
$.
Should I be giving that a name now as a pointer? Maybe. Should I find the variable length and just do it and put it in the for loop? Probably. But this will get me there. As long as it's less than that, then bump it up one. Inside the loop, simply concatenate to the message. Wait a minute, did I do that right? What do I care about the, yeah, long for each one. Oh, now I need an if statement. If, the one we're looking at, list topics, dot options, sub I.
$. Is topic.
You know what, I'm getting sick of that, and him. All right, var OPTS equals dollar LST topics dot options, option. Whoa, wonder if that'll work. That's an entire array, right? I'm just curious to see if that's going to work. I wish I could tell you why this defaults to date, maybe because it's alphabetically first. Crashed. So I cannot set an array to a variable, but I can make it a pointer. So we'll just stop there, and we'll call it topics.
Aren't you missing a parenthesis on the if statement? Something.
Yeah, but it never got here, okay? And I think it would process to that point. So I think this is where it crashed. So that's another good question. Let's put a breakpoint here. Got to do it in the other one. And I haven't refreshed it. Okay, so if I put put a breakpoint here and a breakpoint there. Actually, I don't need them all, just one. And refresh the page and submit. Nope. So maybe it did syntax check it. Maybe that's why I was getting the wrong stuff before.
When you refresh it, it didn't refresh it in the view though. Did you save
Down
it
here?
first?
Yeah, it didn't. I don't know, did you save it in Notepad before you refreshed it?
I think so. Maybe not. Okay, now I think syntactically this is correct, right, Brittany? I think syntactically that's correct. Unless this is wrong, which is, Oh, and I changed that, so I want to do option. Okay, did hit that line. So looks like it was checking syntax errors ahead of time. So now let's step over, see what happens. So far, so good. Undefined. So that didn't work quite the way I wanted it to. So this next one, I say the length will probably do something. And no, that it jumped down to the return false.
Give your length 0.
But why did it? Oh, did I hit the go instead of the jump over? No. Okay, so that didn't work. So we'll go with this. I don't need that. And put my for loop back.
If you do topics, open and closing brackets, will that work? Or no?
In that?
No, on the other side of the equals.
On topics, the name.
It's a
Dot option there.
variable. I don't. There's probably 3 or 4 different ways to check. Do we really want to check them all to make this work? And here it's options.length. Maybe that's what was wrong.
Make sure put the brackets in the second time.
That didn't work. So far, so good. Five sounds right, doesn't it? So that worked. Finally worked our way through it. Oh. It's out right this time. Control Q. There we go. So for each one in I less than topics,
No, X.
dot length, right?
No, X, you already got it.
Yeah, okay, I could use X. Topics.length isn't so bad because it's an array and it's a property. If it needed to calculate the length every time it went in there, that would be awful. So X is good, but no, not anymore. So now I'll do it that way. Bump it up. And then if topics sub I dot selected, okay, this is a list box. So is it selected or isn't it? If it is, then concatenate it to the message. And we'll just leave it at that. Now, no curly brackets necessary because this for loop only has one statement in it. It's an if statement, but it's only one statement. The if statement's true only has one statement in it.
Do you have any quotes around topics?
Topics? No, topics is the name of my array. I have copied the array from list options into something called topics. So that's my topics. Give me the one I'm looking at and concatenate it. Let's see what that does. Put something in between, huh? Uh-oh.
You sure you wanna try it?
Still got my break point. I think I'll get rid of it and be brave. Not quite right. Let's see if that's necessary.
You have to declare it as a variable as an array.
That worked. So each option is its own object that has a value. Okay. And it also has a selected property. So let's take a quick look at that code. And this isn't the only way to do it. I did it differently in my notes. Right? But here I first said, hey, that option in my list box, is it selected? If it is, give me its value. Because initially it was giving me an object. So that was my clue that I'm concatenating an object, which works to some extent. But I don't want the object, so I ask for its value, and I got it. That's its value, which came from here, because we have HTML basics and forms, and these are, looks like they're all pretty much the same anyways. There's an expression web. So notice the expression web is this part that we're getting, not its text.
You can say dot text.
Can I say dot text? I don't think so. I've never seen a dot text. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Wow. That worked. So there in my notes is one way, and I'm going to have to transfer this one over because I like how clean that is. Get me the list. And then for each one of the options, walk through it. It also says in my notes a for each loop doesn't work very well here. I think that's because each option, I might have written that wrong because a for each loop. Let's take a quick look at what it looks like. For variable something in my array. Okay, we already have an array topics, right? So I should be able to walk through that and say for each topic in topics, then you don't need the square bracket. If the topic is selected, give me the text of that topic and concatenate it. That sounds good. Other languages it would make sense because this is now one of the options in the list box. Is it selected? If so, give me its text. Oops. So why not?
In your topic?
Why won't the for each loop work? So maybe my notes aren't lying for a change. That's not bad, 50% today. One time it's true, one time it lied. Okay. Why isn't that working? Let's just do a real quick right here. It would have to be inside the loop, which complicates things.
But if it was true, it didn't check the other one to be false, so it's okay, you're running good.
This is it, and I promised to quit. Well, I have to quit anyways. Next class is coming in. Of course, now my mouse disappears. Test is 0. So topic is 0. I wonder if that's like the index. F10. Run. That's like the index. Stored as text. That's bizarre. So that's the index of the topic. Oh, that might be a JavaScript feature.
Ooh, feature.
If topics, subtopic is selected, then give me topics, subtopic. I seem to remember this as a for each feature in JavaScript. It's still 0, but now it should be concatenating them as we go. Yep. For each does work, but for each here doesn't give you the value, it simply gives you the index. So that's a little different than we're used to in other languages, and that's why I call it a feature. I think it says that in my notes. All right, that's enough for 1 week. You could probably get started on your JavaScript assignment, laying out the pages, doing all that kind of stuff if you're bored, but most of you have other things going on, so it's up to you.